This explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating, the framework of the New World Covenant of Love. You know, there is honestly a profound mystery in the way the world just slows down when we intentionally choose to step off the wheel of constant production. In this explainer, we're going to look at how a specific community, guided by a host known as Seeker Alpha, approaches the concepts of creation, humanity, and ultimately, rest. They invite us to recalibrate our spirits to a rhythm where we're no longer defined by what we achieve or what we buy, but instead by a sanctuary built not of brick and mortar, but of clean, unhurried time. So let's dive right in. To really wrap our heads around how this group redefines rest, follow a quick roadmap. The chaos in the creator, designing a sanctuary, religion versus spirituality, a global remembrance, and finally, the invitation to rest. Starting us off with Section 1, the chaos and the creator. So the host of this community, Seeker Alpha, grounds their whole movement in this really ancient Hebrew understanding of the creator. Interestingly, they don't focus on the traditional story of Adam and Eve's fall in the garden, the disobedience part. Actually, scratch that. It's just explicitly not their focus. Instead, they look at a creator whose primary nature is to manifest, produce, and make, rather than break. This idea is beautifully captured in what they call their invocation of order. During their services, they pray an affirmation that the world was brought forth in goodness. They actually acknowledge that life began in chaos, but, and this is key, it was divinely and gently guided through stages of evolution and order. For them, this gentle guidance is the very definition of grace. It's a complete rejection of those fear-based doctrines, favoring a deliberate, positive evolution instead. And this brings us to a pretty intense challenge Seeker Alpha poses to traditional dogma. He questions certain biblical passages, like the end of Revelation, which promises curses for anyone altering the text, and just bluntly asks, why would God curse someone? If creators make and don't break, he argues, then a strict disciplinary God doesn't quite fit. He suggests that a lot of these rigid theological doctrines were actually designed by men, rooted entirely in control. The source points out a really dark side to these historical, man-made doctrines. It links this strict disciplinary mindset directly to some of the worst brutalities in human history: systematic enslavement, brutal holy wars, and fear-based control mechanisms. It basically stems from this old Roman mentality that the strong do what they can and the weak do what they must. But the New World Covenant of Love completely rejects this premise of brute power. Moving right along to Section 2, designing a sanctuary. To counter that historical chaos, they've designed a very specific order of service. It acts as a structured sanctuary of learning and connection. It flows through 4 clear steps. First, a call to awareness with a moment of silence. Second, an affirmation of humanity. Third is the ministry of the word, which focuses on the law of love and a doctrine of integrity. And finally, it rounds out with community and respect, highlighting our shared stewardship over creation. Now, what's really fascinating is how they actually pull this off. This structured sanctuary isn't made of brick and mortar. It exists entirely digitally. It's an online worship order built around live-streamed services and recorded modules. They host this Saturday Connection of Love over Zoom, creating a digital sanctuary space, which eventually culminates in an annual in-person meeting in St. Paul. A crucial part of their service, which happens during that second step, the affirmation of humanity, is this concept of Ruach. Ruach is the divine breath of life. They hold this collective affirmation that all humans are made in God's image and that this specific breath spoke order from dust. Because we all share this breath, they declare absolute equality. It's a reminder that every single human being is uniquely created and inherently equal from the very moment of conception. All right, Section 3, religion versus spirituality. The source draws a really sharp line between these two concepts. It defines religion merely as the systematic practice, the cyclical, intended pattern of behavior. But they argue that a lot of folks mistake the comfort of that routine for actual faith. According to Seeker Alpha, you can't have spirituality without the structure of religion, but you can absolutely have empty religion without spirituality. True faith only exists if you have a spiritual covenant of love that you are actively fulfilling. And this idea of spiritual fulfillment directly opposes that old Roman mentality we touched on earlier. They contrast brute strength with true might. While brute strength is all about taking by might and enforcing cruelty, this covenant teaches that we actually learn from our musts, our weaknesses. By acknowledging our human weakness, we become so much stronger or mighty compared to those who just take by force. Why? Because those relying on brute strength are usually totally blind to their own weaknesses. To ground this doctrine of integrity, Seeker Alpha points to the lingering global realities of racism, slavery, and cruelty, stating frankly that, well, evil exists. He connects this back to ancient wisdom, specifically reflecting on Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. He notes that we are created from the exact same fibers as the beasts. It's this humbling reminder of our shared, flawed humanity, and it serves as the very foundation for why we literally must treat each other with absolute equality and compassion.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, a global remembrance.
Because they view all of humanity as being cut from the same cloth, this community looks way beyond just a single text. In their order of service, they actually have a formal interfaith acknowledgement. They respect and pull wisdom from a massive array of global spiritual traditions. Seeker Alpha argues against the idea that you can only have one valid faith. Since creation started from one source, he says the Abrahamic covenant stretches across the Holy Quran, the biblical scriptures, right through to the teachings of Hinduism and Buddhism. Technically, we are all family. And they use some brilliant historical anecdotes to weave these different faiths into one grand narrative of human seeking. For instance, Seeker Alpha specifically mentions the rich prince who left his sheltered life to become a hermit and seek enlightenment, a nod to the origins of Buddhism. Then he talks about the prophet drinking coffee in a cave with an angel to take down sacred scriptures, referring to the origins of Islam. They see all of these as totally valid threads in our pursuit of the divine. They even look to Islamic teachings on holy war to emphasize their ultimate love of love. Seeker Alpha points out that in the Quran, a holy warrior is instructed to keep himself completely unstained from anger and sin, even while on the battlefield. So the overarching concept here is self-discipline. No matter the tradition, the focus is always on maintaining integrity and avoiding the stain of anger. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the invitation to rest. The fifth step in their service is the benediction of rest. They define the Sabbath not just as a break from labor, but as an entrance into a completely different state of being. Remember that sanctuary we talked about at the beginning? Well, this is it. A sanctuary built out of clean, unhurried time for spiritual rest, renewal, and communion with the divine. It is a holy, restorative reality. So why does this matter for us today? Because it's a radical invitation to step off the wheel of constant production. It's a promise that we are no longer defined by what we achieve, what we buy, or how fast we run. Instead, it's dedicated time to recalibrate our spirits to the rhythm of the New World Covenant of love. It anchors us in the reality that we are radically, unconditionally loved, so we can then mirror that love back into a weary world. Now, if you're intrigued by this communal rhythm of rest, the source material actually provides the practical details for their digital sanctuary. Hosted by Seeker Alpha, the Saturday Connection of Love gathers every single Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Central Time over Zoom. It's a dedicated space for community members and seekers to connect, and you can join using the passcode LOVE. So, what does this all mean for us? We live in a world obsessed with production, often clouded by historical dogmas and division.